We're now recording this conversation on Cherokee Landscapes and Language.
My name is Whitney Warrior, and I have been the director for the United Two Band in the Historic Preservation Department and Environmental Services for the last 2 years. We work on a lot of projects that kind of go together with environmental services, a lot with the land base. So we have a lot of projects and partnerships that we try to push forward with National Park Service, Forest Service, and anything that we can do that would help be a collaboration of effort for the preservation of traditional cultural practices of Cherokee people, not just Cherokee Nation to just by label, but of the people. So our goal is to preserve what can be preserved, but to also, roll with the times. So to not let those parts of our practices be lost, but to include what new practices can be input with our youth. So as the times change, we also have to change with those particular type of things that we have. A lot of our practices can't be spoken to specific individuals, or we have to have permission from our elders for certain things. So a lot of the times we have a problem with how to preserve a particular type of thing. We can't take a picture, or we can't draw it, or we can't video record it. So those are the biggest parts about older traditional practices that we've come into issues with, and how we can move forward with the new time and the new technology that we are experiencing. And a lot of the things that we have with our traditional practices is that they're being forgotten, like the language. So that's a really huge thing for us, is trying to find and invent new ways for people to become more passionate about language, traditional practices of any tribe whatsoever. It's been a really big help that, a lot of immersion schools and stuff are popping up. But the thing is that if you don't use it, you lose it. And if you are speaking to someone who was in the class with you and they share the same dialect as you, that, yeah, you can continue that language, but should you go to a smaller community or Cherokee, North Carolina, they're going to have a very different dialect. And so I think the part of the preservation is to not only just preserve a uniform of this type of language or culture, but to embrace all of the categories of it, the dialects, to become well-rounded in all of it, to have some of that be included in your friendly conversations, even just including, a word or two with your friends that, don't have to be Indian, that can immerse you into learning this more, you're teaching them to include part of who you are with their language. I mean, I'm sure when you're younger, you get taught all the bad words, right? All your friends know all the bad words. That's how it starts, is, friendly games, conversations, having fun with these words, making it fun to learn the language, to preserve it anywhere you are with anyone you're friends with, because they have a good time learning all the bad languages, right? Everyone does. But that's kind of what we're working on right now. We've received our first digital humanities grant to preserve the traditional practices of Cherokee history and culture. And so we want to preserve what used to be so that we can move into what needs to be, how we can move it forward to teach them a different way. So that's what we're working on right now.
Thank you, Whitney. We appreciate that. Yay.
Justin McBride. I'm happy y'all are here. My name is Justin McBride. And just as a way of introduction, I kind of wanted to show you some of the work that Dr. Maloney and I did over the last couple of years, if you don't mind. It's fast. We can blow through it and not have to spend too much time on it, but we will gladly revisit whatever you want to. Oh, I can't find my thing. There we go. So, Jeff, just feel free to jump in whenever you need to jump in. We'll just go through this. But let me move this over. Is that possible to move that over? That's exactly where my thing is.
Move which over?
This, the titles. Can I close on that?
Just close it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's not good.
I'll move this over here then. Sorry about that. So we've been focusing on linguistic landscape, and this is an area of research within applied linguistics that has been taken off in recent years, and I think it's really interesting stuff. It's a focus on the informative and symbolic functions of signage, mostly, but really just visible instances of language that convey language information. There's an emphasis here on the manipulation of signage to maintain or to respond to social prestige attitudes or social hierarchies that may exist within society. And there's a specific interest on who puts up signs, on what signs are put up, where signs are located, how they convey that information, and that from a linguist point of view, that typically involves thoughts about what language varieties are put into play in order to do this, and then why or why not those signs are deployed. We've been looking at the linguistic landscape, specifically of Cherokee language here in Tahlequah. If you're not familiar with the area, perhaps if you've come here from afar, like I know we have a gentleman here from Utah, we have a population of about 17,000 people here. A little over a quarter of the population here is native, and we were really interested in sort of the central bypass loop. I realized that there's much more stuff that could be seen elsewhere in the community, but this is a nice sort of area that you can bite off and look at and sort of digest in one big chunk. And we were really interested in just documenting what images that we could find of Cherokee language within this loop on one particular day, just sort of get a snapshot of what July 9th, 2019 looked like in terms of Cherokee linguistic landscapes. And we got 78 pictures from this little area and about 153 instances of Cherokee. We then geotagged all of those images and uploaded it to GIS. We used QGIS, the Bucharest version. What is interesting, if you can see over in this map over here, that most of the instances of Cherokee within that larger loop, I'll go back to that loop, there's the loop. Most of the instances of Cherokee exist just on this one little strip of Muskogee Ave and are also sort of concentrated in a couple places. There's an awful lot of stuff around the entrance loop to Seminary Hall and the sidewalk that goes around Courthouse Square. And in that little area, most of the things that we are looking at are instances of the syllabary. If you're not familiar with Cherokee language, we have multiple ways of writing the language. One of them is the traditional syllabary. We usually use the print version that was introduced in the 1800s. And then there's also a Romanized version. So sometimes you'll see people write like OCO is OSIYO as opposed to the syllabary characters. Most of the instances we found were syllabary. About 9% were Romanized. Most of them were also bilingual. Some of them were bilingual in interesting ways too, so that the English and the Cherokee language didn't necessarily line up as closely as maybe you might expect. And then we also were interested in who put these signs up, because that's part of linguistic landscape. And it turns out, if you sort of think about the university, the city, tribal officials, and just private in general, most of the origins are from private individuals, either as families or as businesses or whatever. Jeff, do you want to add anything to this at all?
Nope, you're doing great.
Okay, good deal. I don't want to step on you or anything, so please let me know if you want to say something. I just want to just really briefly show you some of the images that we got that day. So here we have the entrance sign just down the road here to the university. Here we have an entrance, the sign for Seminary Hall. What's really interesting about Seminary Hall is how it's actually referred to in Cherokee versus how it's referred to in English. It's Seminary Hall in English, but in Cherokee, it's still the school where the big girls go, right? It's where the big girls are taught. This was formerly the Cherokee Female Seminary.
Oh, wow.
We also have some interesting things with regard to the city. So we have Downing Avenue, which is a long and important road in town, but we have older signage and we have new signage, and the older signage doesn't exactly line up with the new signage. So here in the older signs of Downing Street, it says, like this is a main road in Tahlequah. That's what the sign says in Cherokee. But over here, we have this Udetawadi thing, which is interesting in and of itself too, because it's not necessarily the Sawanoski stuff. But these two signs are both for the same street, but they're presented differently. And it's interesting to think that this one is much, much older. You can see visible signs where, but when it was replaced with this other one that does not convey the same information. Lots of stuff around town for tribal organizations and tribal facilities and whatnot. And some of them are just like the name of the town here, but some of them are much more complicated, like now taking applications or no parking. And there's a really interesting sign for a particular Supreme Court justice that's written a very lengthy text in Cherokee as well. If you look at the private stuff, some of the things that are interesting about it is that it's just a range of people who have done this. So we have instances of like community stuff. We have businesses. Here, these folks, they make good food. The sign up on the window says.
Oh.
But we have around the courthouse square, I think in 2001, there was a big push for people to buy like commemorative bricks around the courthouse square. And a lot of those have Cherokee language on them. And what's really interesting is some of them don't necessarily line up with what the English that might be there in the Cherokee. So here's an example of one that says Long Valley Kituwa Meeting Place here. And the very same thing, just across one other brick, it says Long Valley Ceremonial Grounds. So this is specifically indexing a Kituwa identity. So I think this is really interesting work. And if you also consider the sort of the history and the place within Cherokee identity, this really speaks to other issues that we could probably get into. For instance, the importance of Seminary Hall at NSU. It's important to NSU, of course, too, but it's also, there's a complex and nuanced history with the Cherokee Nation as well. And it's very important. And I think it's also an enduring symbol of Cherokee's commitment to education, insofar as one of the oldest extant educational facilities in America west of Mississippi was actually a Cherokee institution of higher learning. We also have Courthouse Square, which is, of course, very important to Cherokee Nation as a symbol. It's the former national capital. It's still the Cherokee National History Museum, or I should say it's actually the Cherokee National History Museum. And it's adjacent to several other tribal sites, like the prisons right there, the Supreme Court Museum, all sorts of cool stuff that goes on around. The new pavilion is just down there too. And then, of course, Muskogee Ave kind of links these two in an interesting way. So it's sort of the most Cherokee-intensive street in the area that we photograph. And there's a good reason for it. It sort of links this one very important place to another very important place. So it would make sense to see an awful lot of Cherokee instances in that area between. And of course, it's also not coincidental that this is the area that the parade travels down at Cherokee National Holiday, which I think is pretty fun. I think it also, there's some interesting identity stuff that's really complex that you can kind of think about. What do these instances mean? Well, if you think about Cherokee people as sort of a broad category that incorporates folks who are citizens of Cherokee Nation, and incorporates UKB folks, and incorporates Eastern Band folks, and there are also people who may be ethnic Cherokee, but who aren't members of either of these. Maybe they have a CDIB with another tribe or something like that. All of these people have the syllabary at their disposal. This is something that specifically speaks to the identities of Cherokee people. But you also have Cherokee language user as a subset of that. And most of the Cherokee language users are, of course, part of that larger group. But there are some, I would assume there are some non-native folks who also speak Cherokee as well. So don't worry about the shape. It's kind of hard to integrate everything. But so I have a much larger bit on the non-Cherokee speaker. Just no other way to do it. Within the Cherokee language users, you have people who are literate in the Cherokee language, and then you also have non-literate in the Cherokee language people. And so the identity of being able to read and write in Cherokee is layered atop the idea of having Cherokee that you can use on a daily basis. If you are a reader, then you have the people who can read the syllabary versus the people who read the romanization. And then, of course, down at the bottom, we have this non-Cherokee group, which includes other Native folks who may be in the area, who may feel a sense of pride of living in a city where we have so much Cherokee language visible. It's important to see this sort of thing. And also non-Natives and allies thereof who would be interested in these things as well. Right there in that tiny little dot is sort of what we're expecting to see this sort of linguistic landscape. And that's sort of what we looked at. Do you have anything you want to add, Jeff? I really don't want to take all of that.
No problem. Just one thing, as I've reflected a little bit, I think there's the idea of embeddedness and matrix languages. And I think kind of looking at all of the information that we've taken in together, it's kind of apparent, right, that the Cherokee language is well embedded within this community, even though we are kind of in an environment where English seems to be the dominant spoken language.
It's true. It's true. But it's interesting to think about it like as a language that is sort of transported here, but has become the dominant language, and yet at the same time, the Cherokee language, which was also imported here to some extent, because Cherokees originally are Oklahoman, and those languages have always sort of been at odds in some sense. But embeddedness is a great way of explaining that. I think in terms of just Cherokee identity and what this means, I think it's important because Tahlequah is just de facto the capital of the Cherokee world. I don't necessarily know if that's a wonderful thing or an okay thing or whatever, but I think just de facto, we kind of have to acknowledge that. And visible use of the Cherokee signage represents that fact. The density of the signage in this area, especially around areas that have high Cherokee interest, is also very telling. Within regards to the written Cherokee word, we also see that it reflects a personal or shared Cherokee identity. So Cherokees can link their Cherokee identities to place by way of these landscapes. That includes non-speakers too. And it also is a situation that if you are a Cherokee speaker, you can go on and you can get additional layers of meaning by tapping into what the actual connotational or denotational meanings of these representations may be. And I think sort of important to sort of leave you on is that it's a complicated identity marker, the visible use of Cherokee language. On one hand, it signals pro-Cherokee identity of sign creator or the user. At the same time, it opens that pro-Cherokee space. It sort of signals Cherokee's welcome here. We can talk about Cherokee. And that's interesting in terms of the larger Tahlequah area. And I really think that it communicates on the level of identity, and it doesn't necessarily communicate on the level of language, because all these people who maybe are taking advantage of this sense of identity may not actually be speakers of language, but it clearly also communicates on the language level too. So it's communicating on a couple of really important levels. Thank you very much, Wickham.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sionagad, I won't take up a whole lot of your time. I'm kind of just sandwiched between a couple Oganali, Cyrus, Dr. McBride, and Dr. Maloney's work, mostly as the person that had been brought in to kind of integrate a lot of the language signage work that Dr. McBride and Maloney have been able to compile into the Mapping Tahlequah History project. So, slowly no dasha negatu our Kaylee on Isopong Gately Dohino. Just throwing a little bit of Cherokee out there, but I was really excited to kind of do some like layered interpretive, or not interpretive, but as a Cherokee second language learner, I was wanting to provide a little bit of insight on the language work that they had provided. Whitney Warrior had talked about dialectual differences in Cherokee, and that's a point of pride in a lot of communities. So being able to understand if there was any evidence of different dialects in the signs that had been put up around town, or what institutions kind of understanding the provenance of some signage, like those bricks, that was fascinating. So just kind of extracting, quote unquote, the data from that research in order to apply it in the Mapping Tahlequah History is like when I really came into this. And I was super happy to be able to interact with Cyrus's project and kind of seeing, and I instantly saw a link between Dr. McBride and Maloney's work as kind of documenting like the current of 2019. And then it's super exciting to see Cyrus's work in planning towards the future of Cherokee signage that's taking up the kind of the dominant English ambient or the noise around Tahlequah. Like a couple of my siblings who graduated from the Cherokee immersion school. So, and that's something that them and friends that had difficulty with was just like how much English is imposed upon everyday life. And it was definitely a common concern of the parents of students. Was there were some that were concerned about them needing English to kind of exist in the world and to be successful. But then there were also folks that were like, but we want our kids to actually be, you know, as close to fluent as possible, like if not at the immersion school, somewhere else. But through TV shows, I mean, you can't even go to Del Rancho, you can't go to any restaurants around town without being confronted by English, not even just spoken, but visually as well. So I'm excited to see Cyrus's work in that, and feel free to ask questions regarding Mapping Tahlequah History. We don't have a whole lot of time.
Thank you.
Although for everyone that's spoken so far, you guys have had great presentations. The project that I've been working on, it's still a pretty fledgling project that I started over winter break mainly. The inception took place previously, but talking about signage and Cherokee language throughout Tahlequah first as the de facto Cherokee capital, as was pointed out, but with broader goals to reach throughout the rest of the reservation, including Qualla boundary, and hopefully with templates that could be applied to other tribal groups as well, that this project could take its own form in other places. I'm trying to work with local businesses first to start providing free Cherokee translations. So that way, across different linguistic domains, we can have that opportunity. These immersion students can go and then go to a place like Del Rancho or a coffee shop or somewhere else like that, and they can have that option. They can have that provided different linguistic domain. It doesn't have to be English. Of course, it doesn't have to be already, but visually and with the language that they're surrounded by, it's not presented that way. This would at least facilitate that. It would show that not only around the places like the museums or anything else that Cherokee Nation or the UKB or the Eastern Band works with, that just anywhere out in town. So after they go to the immersion school, after they maybe see their grandparents, they go to ceremonial grounds, if they go to a coffee shop, if they go to a retail store, if they go to anywhere like that, that it's there. They can see the language. They can know this is a place I can speak this. This is a place this is welcome. Maybe they don't realize that. It's part of what gets talked about in linguistics with linguistic domains about, sorry, getting caught up in my stuff. But that's the idea of the project. I'm creating templates starting where anyone can be participative in this. You don't have to speak Cherokee to be working on this, so if we want to translate a bunch of stuff, anyone that speaks English can start, where you take all the English at a place, you write it all down, and then, especially with businesses, we're going to see a lot of overlaps. So if you see 3 coffee shops in town, there's going to be a lot of vocabulary that's going to be reused. A few different retail shops in different towns, that vocabulary and like wordage is going to be reused. So we'll write down all the English, we'll create these common word lists, and then those can be applied and almost immediately implemented. As far as talking about different dialects throughout different communities for Cherokee and otherwise, we also want to have audio recordings that will be made available, recorded by speakers from the different communities themselves. So that way you can have fluent audio that you can scan via QR code whenever you go into a business. So you can hear the actual Cherokee audio, but also from a community, like the version of Cherokee, the dialect of Cherokee that would be local to the community where you would be in these businesses. Because people in Jay are going to speak different than over in Stillwell, than over here in Tahlequah, than over in Kuala. And beyond that, as far as what it would look like implemented, you would see hopefully an idea. You go into anywhere around here, you see English already. You see the hours of operation, you see the name of a place, you see the menu, you see the pricing, you see different things like this, all in English, to just have syllabary right there beside it, to not take over, to not be like one is better than the other, but to have that option, to have that available. And then, like I was mentioning with the audio and everything else, to have a QR code that could be scanned in. So that way you can pull up the bilingual translations for both, including there to have that Romanized version as well, in case someone doesn't read syllabary yet, to have the Romanized translation available as well, to have those audios available so you can hear it, and to include with that QR code as well further resources. If someone's taking the time to scan the QR code and is not just looking at the syllabary on the wall, but they want to actually know how to pronounce it. They want to be participative in that, to provide further language resources that are available online via Cherokee Nation, UKB, whoever already has those resources available. Point them in directions of, you want to learn, this is how it's available. And this is what is already accessible, because that's the reality of it that I don't know if a lot of people think about too much, maybe in this room, but the language isn't dead. We still have it around. Obviously, we still have the immersion schools and we still have plenty of speakers in town. But I don't know if a lot of people realize it can be used. It's not against the rules. So that's my ultimate goal, is I'm hoping that people realize that outside of linguistic domains, such as a museum or outside of a ceremonial ground, you can go to a coffee shop in Northern Cherokee. You can go to a grocery store, hopefully one day, and it just be available. But again, also for these templates and everything else to be created in a way that you could substitute, say, Cherokee for Choctaw, for a different non-Indigenous language as well, that these templates are templates. So once they're fleshed out enough, anyone can take that, replace that with the language of wherever your local community is or whatever you have available. Nothing to take over what already is there, but to just show that this is all of what's there. It's not just English that's out of place, or it's not just whatever, even including Cherokee. I would love to see Osage around here. I would like to see Caddo, and I would like to see other languages around here. This is their home too. So that's kind of the goal that I've got working on. I've been working with local businesses already. I have a few that are in the queue that I've been working on and creating these templates. It's still in the fledgling idea. All the work for it started around winter break, this previous winter break. But that's everything I've been working on so far. I'm hoping by the end of, I don't know if the summer, but this year, but sometime soon, it'd be starting small. It'd be just a few different places that you can start seeing this more around Tahlequah. It'd be obvious because it'd be stuff not owned by the nation, which again is the point, to show that it doesn't have to be necessarily through the tribe, through a government, whether that's Tahlequah's government, the Cherokee Nation government, the UKB government. It's just the community itself. It's the community's language. Make it available for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes for questions, comments, and I'll watch for questions online. But I mean, I just wanted to make a point as well of just how scholars might call this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, but that's our language of saying, think about all these connections, all this interrelationality of, in language, history, language is an archive and history is embedded in that. Just from Justin sharing Jeff and Justin's work of those signs. I mean, I didn't realize, some of the signs of what it's saying, it's history in the words of what they're calling, what these places are called. The place names, how people remember them, that's history, culture, all these dynamics, they're intertwined, they're interwoven. And that's why it's also so important as ways of knowing embedded in language, epistemologies, the knowledge and history. As someone who is a descendant of long walk survivors of Diné, and of boarding school survivors. And I say that outright because my dad almost froze to death trying to run away from a boarding school that punished him for speaking our ancestral language, and the pain I feel that I didn't speak or grow up learning the Nepazad. And I sense that, with a lot of friends of different languages that have been targeted. People, it's no coincidence that languages of peoples who have been targeted by genocide and termination are at risk. Those are intertwined as well. And those histories are interconnected. So it's just really exciting. I thank all these individuals for being bridges and helping us to connect different communities and peoples, and the possibilities for mapping Tahlequah history as we added our language tab and are working to connect, the signs as place and space and language. We're really excited for that. And the media, as mentioned, through Cyrus's work of audio recordings, the possibilities, we're really excited to support these different initiatives. And Wado, thank you so much for that work. Questions from audience? Anyone? I want to open it up. We have time. Shy group. Yes, Jennifer.
Have you talked to Hunter's Home about doing some of the signage in that for some of the translations? I suggest it. Just contact
Question.
Teska. She is the manager of the site, and she can get that something started there, because I think that would be a fantastic thing to do out there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Jennifer's question made me think of one I had while I was sitting next to you and while people were talking. Was there's this kind of divide, it sounds like sometimes, with museums, centers, even tribal preservation historic offices, and this divide of and government, as well mentioned, and then community. How do you all navigate that? Because I was interested, now Jennifer's at Fort Gibson and she'll be in the next session. I was thinking how, it was eerie for me being in some of these sites that are so intertwined with Indigenous histories and communities. And there was hardly any mention, on signs or plaques, and certainly language, not there. So this question of also Hunter's Home, these other sites that are run by the Oklahoma Historical Society. And again, these different lines that can be drawn between tribal nation, state government, community, but then we're sharing all these spaces. Like we are, even if we're not sharing them, we are in these same spaces together. How do you all navigate that? Insights? Anyone would want to share comments about that? Whitney?
Well, we do it through like a programmatic agreements. So when there's a site that has so many different types of tribes that, resided within the area, they have to call for consultation. So it's their Section 106 consultation for every tribe to be considered or request that they consult on this area or this type of project. And with these agreements, they want any kind of information, what we can do, what you can't do. And so after that consultation, length of time depending on how long it takes for the tribes to come to some agreement together, then they'll push forward for projects to finalize and do this and do that. And so pretty much after that consultation point, can't put in, oh, well, we objected to this. It's got to be within a certain amount of time. So the tribes do get consulted when it comes to things like this. If you see tribes that are not on there, either they don't have a program that helps support consultation, or they have, and I hate to say this, but very minimal resources for employees with this kind of knowledge to push forward, say, yes, we want to be included. Even just to say that, just keeps them included the whole time, can get their name on a project that easy. But it just comes down to the agreements and how much the tribe will invest in that consultation period to be a part of a project.
I don't know if anyone else wanted to remark on that, or we have other questions popping up. I have a question online. Thank you, John, who mentioned, this is a comment, was while looking for jobs at the Veterans Administration, or oubliette, as we sometimes call it, I noticed there are a ton of positions open in the government's Indian Health Services. As a dental assistant, language barriers can make the job almost impossible. And then in reference to your coffee shop signage, there would be a defined industry lexicon for dentistry. It might be a long shot, but this could be an interesting avenue to pursue government funding or backing, particularly as it could later be applied to the Chinese syllabary, considering current world tensions. I guess that's more of a random thought question. Thank you, John. Thoughts about that these potential connections like with health, other possibilities of funding where it could be being brought up?
It's definitely been brought up to me before that this idea, as it gets further along and as more businesses have made implementations, that there could be avenues of nonprofit or grant funding and things like that. At the moment, there is no funding. At the moment, it's some speakers and some other people that are trying to put it out there. And I think that's an opportunity in the future. And as far as other medical or other different domains like that, there's been places local to Tahlequah that have already had interest in that as well. There's a physical therapy place, I think it is. It's either physical therapy or osteo stuff that they were looking at that too. The idea for where I'm starting, bring up hunters, want to bring up some other stuff too, in different linguistic domains, stuff owned by communities, by governments, is, at least for my project, it's starting to work with the local businesses themselves, as local businesses are community owned in the first place. So it's the community working with the community, as opposed to a governor representative working with a state thing or historical preservation. Not that I'm opposed to that, not that I don't want to see that stuff there too. I would love to be participated in that. It's like any way that I could be, but it's that community working together. So if there's a local medical place on here in town, it's not part of a bigger group, something that's owned by just local people, that's part of it too. They don't have to jump through certain hoops. If they want to provide language, it's the same for that coffee shop, same for anything. It's locally owned. On top of that, being the community themselves and having a language, assuming it's like say Cherokee Landscape and Language owner, and they just operate as part of that being the community themselves, it's something that the community owns as a community. They don't have to jump through these hoops of talking, do I need to talk to someone? If we want to change signs around town, you have to talk to the city, you have to talk to different people, as opposed to I am a business.
So that's why you're focusing on businesses first, where you have more of that direct engagement, basically.
That is part of it too, as well as again, that those businesses, they are the community themselves too. They don't have to ask for permission, and they're the community. They can just implement it. And there's a lot of people that are Cherokee. There's a lot of businesses like Cherokee run, Cherokee operated that want this. There's a lot of people that wish they could have that access to the language, or maybe not access is the right word, but just to be able to use it, because a lot of us speak it. Not a lot of people speak it. And there's a lot of people, especially business owners, who, especially if they're from around here, maybe their dad did, or maybe their grandpa did, and they wish they could make that accessible. This is a way to do that. And again, a way that they can just do. Once they have that stuff available to them, they can just implement it.
Awesome.
That's the idea of like the starting point. But yes, for medical, for other things, for future funding, for possible grants, possible nonprofits, it's definitely stuff that is in the idea. It's stuff that I definitely have interest in and I'm looking to down the road. It's on the radar for sure.
Okay, awesome.
But yeah, this is the still kind of inception and foundation of it all.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
That's why we're here. Think.
Yeah,
Got to start somewhere. Yeah. Well, we are up on time already, 2:30, and we have our next session starting in 10 minutes. So there is some wiggle room to come up to our panelists. That's the point, is share, contacts, talk. We are going to move to Web Tower because this room is going to have classes and other reservations in it. So our last session and activity for today will be back down the hall in Web Tower, but it also will be a little more interactive, hearing from some of our partners coming in who worked with us at NSU or outside of NSU and the surrounding areas and community. And so we definitely want to hear people's feedback and remind people that if you didn't receive through email a more detailed program, but if you're on Zoom, you did, because that's how you got here. Anyway, is at the last page, there is a QR code. There is a shortened URL, a bit.ly. So if you have other questions, comments, insights that we can share, we would really appreciate it and ask you to fill out that survey. And you can do it even after every session, because we have people who have been with us through the different sessions of today. And so we have just 2 sessions remaining, a couple hours that will fit in of, actually only 1. Oh my goodness, time flies. So the last being this last hour from 2:40 to 3:50, and 10 minutes of some closing remarks and opportunity to hear feedback directly here in Web Tower. And we thank you all for joining us. Please let's give our panelists a hand and appreciate all their work. Something I also had thought about and want to pitch for those still with us on the Zoom webinar and here with us now is we want to have, many workshops, many meetings, especially for folks who are in the area or want to stay in touch with John and I and our Mapping Tahlequah History team, student researchers that we're so excited have been key parts. Ia is a alum and was in one of my classes and has been crucial in making these connections and bridging us of thinking about, all right, how do we connect this with the Mapping Tahlequah History Project? What would that look like? How do we envision that, right? So it begins with these conceptualizations, ideas, and conversations, of learning from each other. And then, what are the next steps, step by step? And what, like in Brendan Rensing's conversation, what do we need to watch out for? How do we pay attention to these kind of logistics, ramifications, all these aspects? But there will be another NEH sponsored workshop on Monday, April 10th, about a year from now. And as I mentioned, Dr. Elizabeth Rule, a Chickasaw scholar who designed an mapping indigenous DC mobile app. She has already agreed to be our keynote for next year, 2023. And something that came to mind is that if anyone has projects, even Cyrus, we'd love to have you back and see what happens in a year. Or hear more from Whitney and what is happening, with the project she is involved in and community. If you'd like, or others, in the community who want to share, I've heard people, on the side coming up to me, telling me about different initiatives and work that they're involved in. We could do, a call for proposals in that way, or just a call if anyone's interested in sharing and presenting and exchanging, getting feedback, insights. That's something I want to already announce and put out there and to look out for as we are asking for your contact to stay in touch so we can update you on these developments, coming up in the future. Okay. And thank you all for joining this session. I'll close the webinar. Thank you for those joining us virtually. And I hope you all stay for our last hour moving into the Web Tower. Thank you all.